My name is Hannah, and this is my beauty budget. Hey y'all, so this video is actually one in a series, and if you've been watching me for a long time or you've gone back and watched some of my old videos, then you have probably seen some of the other ones. There's how my No by Year changed my skincare routine, how my No by Year changed my makeup collection, how my No by Year changed my closet. I think there's one about how my No by Year changed my relationship with bath and body products, and I always knew that this one was coming, but I didn't feel prepared to film it right at the end of my No by Year or even right at the beginning of the following year, this year, because I suspected then, and I believe that I was right, that I wouldn't truly understand all of the repercussions of my No by Year until I had had the chance to live for several months in its wake. And at this point, about halfway through my following year, my budgeting year, I am starting to get a really solid handle on the difference between my life now and the way that my life was before my No by Year, both in terms of my relationship with shopping, which is something I talk about a lot on this channel, and in other ways, which in some ways I haven't talked that much about on my channel, even though I tend to open up quite a lot about my feelings, especially in my check-ins. There are some things that I haven't really been prepared to talk about yet, but I'm ready to talk about them now. And I feel like that means that it is time for me to finally sit down and film this video, reporting as best as I can at this point, 7 months after its end, about how my No by Year changed my whole life. I've been waiting because I wanted to make sure that I could do the topic justice. I wanted to gather all of the information, but I've also been putting it off because I'm a little bit nervous. It's a lot, and I have taken significant notes. I want to keep myself on track and make sure that I say all that I want to say. So we're doing it. I've armored up. I'm wearing my Tom Ford Wild Ginger lipstick. I've got my Clionadh multi-chrome eyeshadows on my eyes, and I'm ready to do this thing. Let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video. So the first way in which my No by Year has changed my life has to do with my sense of value. And this is something that I have touched on in the other videos in this series. So the one about how my No by Year changed my skincare routine, I feel like is particularly apropos of this bullet point of how my No by Year changed my life. So I'm no longer willing to spend $60, $80 on a single piece of luxury skincare, no matter how good it is for my skin. And that is a huge about face from the way I was before my No by Year. Before my No by Year, I was spending thousands of dollars a year on $60, $80, $100 items of skincare because I felt like that was the only way to keep my skin in good shape. I definitely don't feel like that anymore. And as I've tracked my spending through my budget and I've paid really close attention to what truly brings me the most joy, what gives my life the highest quality, expensive skincare ain't it. Even cheap skincare ain't it. Skincare is a utilitarian thing to me. And now that I know that, because I've been budgeting and paying attention to the repercussions, the emotional repercussions of each thing that I buy, that has also helped me hold on to my sense of value with regards to things like skincare and staple makeup products, bath and body products, things like that. I've shifted into a replacements only mentality for basics that has stuck. I was doing that during my No by Year, but I've carried that with me. I still feel extremely reluctant. I mean, reluctant is too weak a word. At this point in my life, I would never buy a shampoo if I already have shampoo at home. And before my No by Year, I was constantly buying a new shampoo when I had 3 or 4 half-finished ones at home, just for something novel, just to try something new, just to chase the next best thing. And that now seems to me like foreign behavior. And then the other way in which my No by Year changed my sense of value, I wanted to touch on it here. It's something I haven't really talked about, and it has to do with the definition of self-care and the way that we enact self-care. And I have to give credit where credit is due. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because my friend Prachi, who's currently in the middle of a No by Year, talked about this at length in a recent video, and I will link her video in the cards right now. I highly recommend watching that one if this is interesting to you. She spoke in that video about the fact that before her No by Year, she used to spend so much money on makeup and skincare because it was the way that she tried to self-soothe. It was to her self-care, but because she was always buying those things, she didn't have money left over for things like therapy. That's the main thing she talked about in that video. And I realized listening to her that I have had a similar shift in mentality about real self-care versus surface level self-care. So by budgeting and not spending all of my money on the trappings of self-care, like bath bombs and luxury scents and luxury lipstick and skincare and all of that stuff, I then now have money left over to potentially save for real self-care, things like going on a vacation every once in a while, having a massage every once in a while, therapy, like paying for therapy when I need it, my meditation app, buying healthier food, things that actually count as deeper and more integrated self-care. I now value that, and like Prachi said in that video, I would rather spend the money on that than spend it on acquiring makeup and skincare. So my sense of value surrounding self-care and what I place value on in the realm of self-care has changed a lot because of my no-buy year. The second thing I have on this list, it may seem obvious, but it's a big deal to me. After my no-buy year, I found myself able to budget for makeup, skincare, clothing, and homewares, my problem categories. I have never been able to budget for those things in my life, and I have tried. Lord, I have tried. I remember one year my New Year's resolution was I would only spend $100 a month, and that was when that was a lot for me. Like I was just scraping by. I had just started my Etsy business. I didn't really have very much income, and I was like, I'm gonna stick to $100 a month on extras, and by February I had broken it. There were times when I remember getting budgeting apps, setting aside, moving things into different categories, tracking it with Mint. I have tried in so many ways and so many times to stick to a budget because I knew that I had a problem and I could never do it. My need, what felt like a need, or what was in my damaged brain before, a need for the hit of something new and a need to kind of push outside of those rules and fantasize about myself with fancy things, was greater than my willpower when it came to budgeting. So even though it seems so normal now, it seems like such a part of my life, it's so integrated into my channel, the fact that I am able to budget is a triumph to me. It represents, again, a huge about face and a significant point of evolution in my life and in my life of spending and shopping. One of the main things that helps, and one of the direct ways in which the no-buy year has helped, is that I feel it in my bones now that it's okay not to buy a thing that I want, because I spent a whole year wanting things and not buying them. The no-buy year didn't take away my desire for things. It just meant that I was living in the unfulfilled desire. And by doing that month after month after month, I learned that it's okay. So now I want things all the time, and that's a familiar place to me. Just wanting them, not buying them, that's my home. And I've put up some pictures on the wall, got myself a nice jacuzzi. I'm like hanging out there. I'm living my best life in that space. Wanting and not buying, that is my life going forward. That has to be my life because I don't have unlimited funds. I used to not like that place. That used to be a desolate place for me, and I would get out of it as fast as I could by buying stuff. And now I don't need to leave. I like that place. So that's why I'm able to budget. That's the inheritance of the no-buy year into this year. I talked during the no-buy year a lot about those muscles, those no-buy muscles, the muscles of not putting the thing in the cart, not pushing checkout, the muscles of waiting it out when a new release comes out and you feel like it's perfect for you, just waiting a week, waiting 2 weeks, waiting a month, the muscle of not buying something just because it's on sale, not getting excited when a sale drops. Those muscles, they're super strong in me. And so they developed during my no-buy year. They're still really strong. I'm flexing them all the time. I'm using them all the time. And they are keeping me within my budget. The third way in which my no-buy year has completely transformed my life has to do with my finances. And again, this is one that I've checked in about before, but of course it deserves a place on this list. My finances have changed dramatically. I've stopped using a credit card completely. And I think I've touched base on this once or twice, but I wanted to reiterate it here. I do have a latent credit card, but I never, ever use it. I guess you could say it's for emergencies only, or I'm keeping it open because it keeps my credit good, I guess. But I never, ever, ever spend money that I don't have. I know that some people feel like it's a really good practice to spend on a credit card and then pay it off every month. Like that's a way to build up good credit. A lot of my, let's be honest, like my wealthier friends, my friends who are well off, who are good at dealing with money, they do that. But I don't trust myself to do that. I do not want to be in a position where I'm spending money that I don't have in any moment. Maybe in the future, maybe as I move on, but I'm only 7 months out from my no-buy year, and I didn't pay off my credit card. Remember this? Until September of my no-buy year. Because even though I wasn't spending outside of my rules, I still kept putting things on my credit card. It was like it took 9 months of my no-buy year for me to break my addiction to spending money that I didn't have, even though I was buying like gifts for other people, replacements, things that I technically thought I could afford, food. Like I was putting stuff on my credit card that I was allowed to buy within the constraints of my no-buy year. But it took me those whole 9 months to stop doing that and to finally pay the whole thing off, because I was so accustomed to that feeling of safety of paying with the credit card instead of paying with your actual bank balance and knowing that actual money is being drained. For some reason, I mean, it's not that mysterious, but I was more into that first thing. I was more into just being like, oh, I'll pay it off later. I won't worry about it now. But I never, ever do that anymore. Anytime I make a purchase, it's coming directly out of my debit account, my bank account. And that represents a huge shift in my way of thinking about money and my way of thinking about whether or not I can afford a thing. Because I'm always stacking up whether or not I can afford a thing against what's in my checking account. Which brings me to the other way in which my no-buy year has transformed my finances, which is that I now have a growing savings account. It's not always growing because sometimes I have to take money out for emergencies. I've had to do that twice this year. But I had the money there to do it. I was able to do it when my computer broke. I was able to buy a new one. I would never, ever have been able to do that before in my life. I would have had to put it on a credit card. I would have incurred interest. I would have had to pay it off and then some over time. So even though my income is so sporadic and I don't always have extra, it's just been like $50 here, $100 there, sometimes a couple $100 depending on the month. Even though it's just that, a little bit at a time, it's all money that I would have in my former life been spending on makeup and clothes and skincare, and socking it away a little bit at a time instead of spending it, because I don't spend outside my budget, so whatever's left over, I always have it. It's added up. It's made a huge difference. And it's made a difference practically in terms of my ability to rescue myself when I broke my computer, when I spilled, let's be honest, spilled wine on my computer, right? It's helped with that. But it's also made, the biggest difference it's made is in my emotional life, in my spiritual life. I no longer feel like a constant draining anxiety underneath it all. I no longer feel like the wolves are always at the door. Having that cushion in my savings account and knowing that I'm not racking up debt has relaxed something inside of me that was tight and hurting for years, and it's made such a huge difference in my life. I'm not afraid to look in my bank account anymore. I like looking in there. I like looking in my checking account and just seeing if there's any that I can skim off the top and stick into my savings account. And sometimes there isn't. A lot of times there isn't. A lot of times I just check and I'm like, no, I better like hang on to this just in case, I have to buy groceries, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes there is. And whether there is or there isn't a little off that I can skim off the top and save, it doesn't stress me out anymore. I'm one with it. And that, again, like I actually never thought I'd be able to say that. All right, the fourth thing I have on this list, short and sweet, I want less stuff. I genuinely want less stuff in my life. This is having interesting repercussions in my new life as someone who's working on social media and receiving the occasional package in PR. I'm having to navigate that. That's the contents of a separate video. But at the core of that navigation, at the core of even of that sort of struggle or those questions, which are all so interesting and I think really relevant to the larger project of sort of reckoning with beauty. Let's just leave it at that, reckoning with beauty. The core of that is that something shifted inside of me. I genuinely want less stuff. I don't just have feelings like I like minimalism, or I would love it if there was a place for everything and everything in its place, or like a virtue, like an attachment to kind of a virtue that some people think is related with less stuff, like this sense of morality or virtue of people who are more ascetic or more virtuous, and so I like aspire to be that way. It's none of that. It's genuine to me. I actually have become aware that there's sort of a limit to the amount that I actually want to have, and that sort of clicked into place for me during my no buy year. All right, those were the kind of easy ones. Now we're digging into the big guns. We're digging into the into the more complicated ones. Bear with me. So the next one I've called comfort with imperfection. And I have talked about this a lot. A lot of you guys are like on the same page with this with me, but I'm just a lot, I think the briefest way to say it is that I'm a lot less uncomfortable with imperfection in my surroundings and my belongings, because my identity is no longer so closely tied with my stuff. During my no buy year, well into my no buy year, like I would say maybe in the 6th or 7th month of my no buy year, I felt my identity kind of detach from the belongings that surround me. And now, even 7 months after the no buy year, I no longer have a kind of a restlessness in my identity that drives me to go out and acquire new stuff. So that's true, but curiously, owning less and buying less and letting go of a lot of stuff and giving a lot of stuff away, I feel like another way in which my life has changed is that my surroundings since my no buy year are more curated than they've ever been before, which is really interesting, because at the same time that I let go of the obsessive need of perfection, or the obsession with kind of curation and clarity and perfectness and everything in its place and everything exactly perfect for me, when I started to let go of that, at the same time I started to feel like other things that I was doing that were related to this project caused my life to suddenly become, my surroundings to become a more ideal reflection of myself. My closet has become more curated. My makeup collection has become kind of more pointedly a reflection of me. And our home is nicer than it's ever been. All of those things are fallout of the no buy year, and letting go of the need for it to be perfect is also fallout of the no buy year. So it was like, when I let it go, when I set it free, then I was kind of rewarded with the thing that I had always wanted but never had. And now that I have it, I want it less. I don't want it less because I have it, but it happens to have come to me at the same time as I let go of the desire for it. I'm talking about the perfection of my surroundings. And that means that I hold it lightly, and we live easily inside of it. And that's so much better than the old obsessive perfectionism where you curate everything and make it all perfect, and then you live inside of it like, yes, it's perfect and everything has to stay perfect, and then always trying to make it more and more perfect. It's so much better to just have it be and hold it lightly. Basically, I'm happier with my stuff than I ever have been. And it's partly because my relationship with stuff has become less charged. But it's also because I have fewer nicer things than I've ever had before. Both of those things are happening at once, and both of them represent a real change. I feel like I have a much better understanding now of my economic relationship to luxury goods, in that it's not really my place to be buying luxury goods. And I'm talking about things like luxury handbags, or like luxury, kitchenware and stuff like that. I now understand that economically, it is just not it doesn't matter how much I love beautiful things. It doesn't matter how much I love fancy things. It doesn't matter how much I feel like I was a princess born into the wrong body. It's not my place to be buying those kinds of things. I fully understand that now. Part of me didn't understand that before. And I used to want to ape wealth in that manner by buying above my pay grade, so to speak. And I actually no longer even want to ape wealth in that manner. This is where it falls under the heading of being okay with imperfection. I'm okay with the fact that I'm not wealthy. It's like crazy to think that I wasn't before. I was so not okay with it before. I was so feeling all the time like a princess born into the wrong life that I wanted to ape wealth by buying luxury things for my home, for my body, for my face, for my wardrobe. And I actually don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to look richer than I am. And it's gotten me thinking, this is sort of a side note, but I have to wonder how much of the luxury goods economy is dependent on actually selling luxury goods to people who are wealthy, who can afford them, and how much of the luxury goods market depends on tricking people who literally cannot afford luxury goods into thinking that overspending on something luxury will add value to their lives. I don't know, because I don't know the statistics of the luxury goods economy, but it's something that I've been thinking about since my no-buy year. All right, moving on. I have become much pickier as a shopper and much less dependent on the rush of shopping. I mean, you know this if you've been following me with my beauty budget. I'm much pickier about what I buy. There's nothing like having a finite budget to make you think twice about overspending on something and acquiring something, because everything that I acquire rules out a whole bunch of other stuff. And these days I tend to buy things when I'm not feeling that obsessive, frantic, mind-controlling rush of desire for them. I've identified that feeling as a chemical reaction in the brain and not as a good indicator of whether or not I will actually love the thing, and not a good indicator of whether or not I will be glad that I purchased the thing. So I tend to buy things now when I am calmer. This is a huge change from before my no-buy year. Now, after my no-buy year, I tend to buy things when I'm calm. It's less exciting, it's less drug-like, but it is overall a much more positive experience. And it also used to be that I was sort of ashamed of my purchases, especially when I made them in that frenzy and I would like elide over them in my mind. I never really was to the point where I would hide things from Joe, but I would sort of dance around it. I would kind of keep it to myself and sort of try to just like paint over the way that I was spending and the way I was acquiring things. But now the experience of acquiring things has become so positive that I'm really excited when I buy something, and I'm really proud when I've made the decision that the thing that I bought is worth my budget. And so I'll like tell Joe all about it and I'll show it to him even though he doesn't really care. I'm excited when I get to tell you guys about it, and I'm proud. It's become a really positive experience, and I think that sticking to buying things when I'm kind of calm and don't feel drugged by the prospect contributes to that. Second to last change. I have let go of a fantasy of myself and a fantasy of my future. I've talked about the fantasy self before. I get a lot of requests from you guys to talk about the process of letting go of the fantasy self, and I've up to this point ignored them because I didn't feel ready to talk about it yet. Towards the end of my no-buy year, I was starting to be willing to talk and think about things that I had formerly completely avoided ever talking and thinking about. Things that I had been using shopping to look away from. So for example, towards the end of last year, I've never talked about this on my channel, but I started talking with Joe about things like how, if and when and how we're going to buy a house and start a family and all of these things that I had been terrified to open the conversation about because I was living in the grip of the conviction and fear that we would never be prosperous enough to do those things. And that was partly because my vision of that goal was a super pumped up and unrealistic fantasy. My vision, my thing that I wanted that I was so afraid that we could never have, it was an insane fantasy of living in a huge, beautiful house and of somehow having climbed the socioeconomic ladder to a point of wealth that neither my family nor Joe's family has ever had, that neither one of us has ever had, and that neither of us is doing anything to attain. So my image of our future was of an unrealistic fantasy, and I knew that it was unattainable, but at the same time, I wouldn't let it go. So I felt like a failure all the time. I constantly felt stuck, down, hard on myself, left behind. I just always felt like I had failed, I was failing, and like I would always fail. And so to make myself feel better, I would buy the things that my fantasy self in our future mansion would have bought. Luxury skincare, luxury clothes, and that would temporarily make me feel better. It was like it temporarily soothed me into feeling like I was on the path to that fantasy future because I already had a piece of it. I was holding it in my hands. And when I stopped doing that at the beginning of my no-buy year, it took a long time for the fantasy self and the fantasy future to dissolve. It took months, actually. It started happening towards the end of my no-buy year. It was really like in the 7th or 8th or 9th month. It was in the fall. And then what happened was I had kind of a breakdown. It was like a really bad time. This is the thing that I've never really talked about on my channel, but I feel like it makes sense to talk about it now because this was the transformative moment. Like this was the thing that really changed this part of my life, the letting go of the fantasy self. I had a huge fight. Joe and I had a huge fight, like really bad, really bad, sort of long fight that stemmed from my sort of sense of loss of this fantasy and like a dissatisfaction and fear. It was all the stuff that I had been tamping down by shopping. I felt convinced, and again, like it was like in the fall of my no-buy year, I went through this period of time of feeling like my life was not unfolding as it should because all of my fantasies about myself and these like unrealistic, wild fantasies of life were kind of coming to a head and coming out sort of into the open, and they were so full and so present and totally unmanageable because I didn't have my former way of managing them, my former crutch. I went through a season of feeling convinced that my life was not right for me somehow, and it just caused me to kick and scream inside of everything, my career, my life partner, my home, my soul. I mean, it was bad. It was bad. And what happened was I found a therapist. I started seeing him, and he's great, and I'm still seeing him twice a month. That helped a lot. But what really helped was talking it over with Joe. We sat down together, and therapy also helped facilitate that. Not that we went in together, but that me going kind of helped lead me to the place where I was able to sit down with Joe and start talking about this stuff. And we didn't just talk about a house or kids or our future. We talked about other stuff too. Emotional stuff about our personal histories that we'd never really talked about, hopes and fears for the future that we'd never really touched on. And it was painful and messy. It's hard. We talk about a lot of stuff. It's not like we were strangers to each other, but it's hard after being together for 10 years to dig even deeper and talk about stuff that you've never really talked about, because that stuff kind of gets sealed over after a while. So we broke the seal, we brought some of the stuff out. It was painful, it was messy, but we did it, and we came through the other side somewhat of a refashioned couple. And we're still dealing with some of the stuff, we're still talking about it, and it's not comfortable most of the time, but it's happening. So I feel like I've gotten a little bit off track with this part of the story, but I want to make it crystal clear. Something about my no-buy year brought me to the point where I was able to have conversations with my life partner, my partner of 10 years, that I had not been previously willing or able to have. Something about my shopping habit as it had existed before my no-buy year was keeping those barriers up, keeping me from doing that. And after I stopped shopping, it took a long time, again, months, I would say 6 to 8 months, 8 months, but going cold turkey from shopping eventually brought those barriers down. All right, I'm not sure that I did total justice to the issue of the fantasy self and the destruction of the fantasy self during my no-buy year, but again, maybe I can make more content about that if you guys would like. And also, I think that there's something about the very last section of this that will shed some extra light on that topic. So I've written here that this last thing is the one that's the hardest to explain, and it's also the one that's the biggest, most important to me, and most meaningful. And I've given it the title of Contentment and Acceptance. My no by year brought me down to earth, back down to earth into my own body, into my own life, and put me in a position to do the actual work that will be required for me to achieve a good life for me. A life that is realistically the good life that is within my grasp. Not a fantasy life of wealth and fame and boutique hotels and high fashion, but a still lovely life lived in small apartments and maybe a small house one day, full of hard work and open communication and a carefully curated set of belongings and maybe the occasional really, really lovely luxury thing. Before my no by year, I wasn't willing to settle for that. I wanted more. I wanted the most. But now I am really proud and happy to say that I have settled for that. I've settled for the amazing privilege of being able to work for the life, this life, the life that I now feel really lucky to have. And maybe this won't make as much sense to people who aren't discontents, who aren't fantasizing or who don't have a history of fantasizing about the glories of a luxury life that's beyond their grasp. But that was me, and maybe some of you are out there are like that, and maybe this will help some of you. But this has been, this is the way in which my no by year has been the most life-changing. When I filmed my introductory video about my no by year, I talked a little bit about something adjacent to this. I talked about wanting to learn to appreciate what I have. But when I said that in my intro video to my no by year, I was talking about stuff. I was talking about my clothes and my makeup. And my actual no by year went way beyond that. And it pushed me through a crucible of acceptance of not just the stuff in my life, but of my actual life, of my lot in life. It's like my whole life was in the purgatory box before, and now I decided to keep it. And for someone who is as romantic and delusional and as luxury obsessed as I am, and someone who had spent so many years gripped by dissatisfaction and anxiety about the fact that my life wasn't living up to some sort of delusional expectation that I had, that is a tremendous gift to have decided to keep it. It is the thing I've always wanted. So to me, this shift, this last one that I've been trying to explain, has been incredible. I hope I've done it justice. It's very complicated and it might be difficult to get at mentally if you have a personality that's very, very different from mine. I don't know what this will sound like to people who are coming from a very different place in life. But I hope what I have been able to do here is to make it clear that my no by year changed my life in a way that goes far, far beyond the shift in my shopping behaviors. It actually changed my whole way of living my life. And it spurred me to do some of the work on myself that I needed to do to actually become a happier, a more content person. I feel a little bit weird. I feel like I thought I was ready to film this, but now that I just filmed it, I feel like I wasn't ready to film it. And I feel like at the beginning, for the first couple ones, I felt like I was going on and on about how amazing my life is. And then I felt like I was going on and on about what a mess I was and what a delusional, messed up person I was. And so I feel self-conscious about both of those things. And it's not like everything's perfect now, I'm still struggling with this stuff. I still am evolving. I'm still learning in my relationship with shopping and with everything that underlies it and everything that has historically surrounded it. My relationship with all that stuff is still evolving. So it's not like I'm done, right? But I do feel like it's been enough time since the end of my no by year, and I've done enough work kind of navigating the beginning of the rest of my life, which is what we're in now, that I was able to sit down and at least check in about how my no by year changed my life so far, like what I have so far perceived. And some of it is pretty radical. The stuff at the end to me is pretty radical. I didn't expect that from my no by. I knew it was that way. I mean, I knew I was miserable in these specific ways, but I didn't expect my no by year to touch them. I thought it would just handle the fact that I just thought it would handle my finances and stuff like that. So I wanted to share all of the rest of it with you. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you are remembering to take extra good care of yourself this week so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.